So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Schnall. I'm a senior program manager on the Office 365 customer experience team. And my job basically breaks down into two roles. One is building trust with people like you by demonstrating transparency of how we operate and build and manage our cloud services. And the other goal is to make it easier for you to do self-service-based risk assessments of our cloud services as well. Today, what we're going to talk about is why and how Microsoft is the most trusted cloud provider. And so we're going to focus on that first part, building your trust through transparency. So just out of curiosity, how many of you are already using one or more of our enterprise cloud services like Azure, Office 365, Dynamics, and so forth? Great, almost everyone. So I'm gonna start by sort of giving you a little bit of a story on how we are architected, where our data centers are, and therefore where your data is, and how we operate things in the service. So we have one of the three hyperscale cloud services that exists on the planet today. There are only three of them, and we have one of them. We host more than 200 cloud services across the world, and we do that 24/7 by 365. We've got more than 100 globally distributed data centers, edge computing nodes, service operation centers, and all of them are connected with a very extensive fiber network footprint that it actually includes triple redundancy. And by that, what I mean is every single fiber cable that we have is fully provisioned to service the whole entire load of a data center. But for every data center, we have 3 of those cables going in there so that we can actually sustain a double fiber cut and still keep operations up and running for you. Our Microsoft Cloud Infrastructure and Operations team, MCIO, they are part of the C&E group, the same group that includes Azure. They're part of the C&E group at Microsoft, and they're responsible basically for every single facet of the infrastructure, right down to the land on which the building exists, to everything around the data center building and everything about the service as well. Now, we make several commitments to you around security, privacy and control, compliance, transparency, and reliability. And basically today we're going to talk about the things that we do at Microsoft to meet those commitments for you. And these are things like helping you secure your data, managing your data, processing in accordance with the law, providing enterprise-grade services to minimize downtime. And we also try to be as open and transparent as possible about the kinds of things that we do, particularly with your data, while at the same time reinforcing the fact that your data is yours, and it's under your control, and it's private to you. So let's start with security. So our decades of running some of the largest online services have really given us a unique perspective on hyperscale cloud computing. We've got a whole variety of controls that cover all aspects of our cloud services, including physical access controls that include things like fences, access roads, setbacks, gates, secure docks, and so forth. And you're going to see a lot of this stuff in action. And in fact, why don't we just start with going over the physical layer with one of our data centers. So this is a picture of one of the more 100 data centers that we have in the world. You might notice a few things that are directly related to security. For example, notice how it doesn't say Microsoft anywhere. There's no logo or anything else about the exterior of this building that would indicate it's a Microsoft data center. And that's intentional because although we tell you the cities in which the data centers exist, we don't go out of our way to publish the address or give specific details on how to locate them generally. Now, I say generally because we do have a specific set of global customers that are very highly regulated, and as a result, they actually have a need to do things like audit our data centers. So some customers, particularly those members of our cloud compliance program, they get what we call right to audit. So they can come in and audit us, ask us any questions, audit the data centers, and so forth. So obviously for them, we do give them a bit more information than is available publicly. And sure, a determined person could probably do things to figure out where some of the data centers are located, but it won't be easy for them to do so based on the public information that's available. So here's what else you can't see. Our data centers are built with seismic bracing and redundant electrical supplies. We also use a geo-redundant architecture to ensure that data and services remain available in the event of any kind of data center failure or disaster that affects the data center in a given area. Here's another one of our data centers. This one's in the western United States. Again, it's a very nondescript set of buildings that really in no way reveal what's going on inside. Here's another one somewhere else. I actually don't know where this one is. It's another nondescript building that houses some of the servers that comprise Microsoft's cloud services. But let's go back to the one in Western US and have a closer look. And like all of our data centers, this location uses multiple layers of both physical and logical security. So let's focus on the physical security first. So there's a variety of security devices and systems that we use at our facilities in accordance with our established baselines that are driven by the MCIO group. So examples include things like access control systems, alarm systems, barriers, gates, locks, key control systems, video surveillance, recording, and so forth. For starters, all of our data centers are surrounded by a high security perimeter fence. We also have appropriate entry controls to ensure that only authorized persons are allowed access to the premises. And the functional physical entry controls are placed at all physical entry and access points for both first and third-party facilities. And the entry controls for online services managed facilities include electronic access controls, identification validation, visitor registration, and so forth. It's also kind of cool that doors and windows are kept all locked at all times. Equipment and deliveries that get transported into our facilities, they go in and out of a separate isolated docking area that has no direct access to any of the privileged data center information that we have inside as well. Now, the fences only have one area, so there's only one way to get in and one way to get out. And the fence is closed until we validate who you are. If we validate who you are, then you can come in. And of course, at this point, the fence is also serving as a vehicle checkpoint for you as well. And there are cameras everywhere. There's a lot of cameras that you can see and a lot of cameras that you can't see. But whether you can see them or not, you are under constant video surveillance from the moment you approach the gate to when we validate you and open the gate for you, and your whole entire drive to the data center and continuing on through. Now, if you are authorized to enter and you verify your identity, you'll get the green light to proceed, and there's a barrier arm that will be lifted, and that allows you to drive onto the campus grounds. And depending on the location, the drive is going to vary. Some are short drives, some are long drives, but either way, the whole entire time, no matter how long or short of a drive, cameras are going to be following you the entire way. Now, as you make your way towards the buildings, you're only going to be able to park your cars in a designated area. And there are human security guards there to make sure that you do just that. And we enforce that by also issuing parking spaces for some of our facilities. Now, as you make your way through the entrance, which, as you can see, includes more cameras, smart card readers, secure communication lines, and so forth, you'll come in through the front entrance. And then you'll also have to be validated again, and you'll do that by talking to the security guards who are staffing this 24/7/365. And in fact, you're literally just talking to the same people who've been watching you this entire time already. So they've been expecting you. Now, each facility is somewhat unique with respect to ownership, size, location, and security risk. So the deployment of actual numbers of security officers does vary from site to site, but we do have it staffed with human security guards 24/7/365. And we also have the ability to not just monitor security, but to respond to events and also to provide functional support to any law enforcement patrols or any of the MCIO facility checks or access control processes that we need to go through. And all of our security officers, as you might imagine, go through fairly rigorous training in terms of doing their job and monitoring the data center, protecting the data center, and maintaining security. Now, at this point, we're only at the front door, and all we've done is validate ourselves with the humans that are there. Now we also have to validate the system. So once you've passed the security office, you have to enter this vestibule, or what is sometimes called a man trap. And it's a one-way thing that requires both multi-factor authentication through the use of a smart card. And it's actually a very small number of Microsoft employees that have a smart card that will give them access to the data center. So every Microsoft employee has a smart card, which we use for security and authentication. But there's an extremely small number of us who have smart cards that can actually authenticate and get into a data center. And all of the people who do have those smart cards, they have legitimate business reasons to have them. And all of their access, everything they do is monitored, logged, and audited as well. But once you're in the vestibule, the door closes and locks, and now you have to use biometric authentication to open it and access the data center. Basically, we're looking at your fingerprints and your palm print at this point. Now, if authentication fails, well, guess what? The doors lock, and you are stuck in there until the police come and take you away to jail. That, of course, has not happened, but that's the theory behind it. I mean, once you enter with your smart card, the one door opens, you go in there, and before you're allowed to put your hand down, the door behind you closes, and you are now locked in a vestibule where the only way out is your palm print. And if your palm print does not authenticate, it's going to get a little warm and stuffy in there while you're waiting to be hauled off to jail. Now, if you do authenticate successfully, then you get to enter inside the data center. But even then, there are still additional security procedures that you have to go through before you can access sensitive areas like the server rooms where we keep all of your data. So for example, even at this point, you still need to undergo a full body metal detection, and you'll need to use your smart card again to enter any room with equipment, and that equipment could be servers, networking components, cooling, power, airflow, fire suppression, etc., you name it. And the full body metal detection is there because we have policies that prevent the use of any removable media. So if you're trying to bring like a USB stick in or something like that, we're going to catch it. The sensitivity on these metal detectors are quite a bit higher than what you might find in the ones that are used in airports even, so that we have very rigorous detection of basically any metal components that you might be trying to bring into the data center. Now, of course, we do have policies that disable the USB port, so even if somehow you were able to get a stick through, it wouldn't do anything for you because all the USB ports are turned off. Now, once in the server room, you're going to see, surprise, a lot of servers. And lots of servers. And lots of servers. And then you may even see servers that have lock cages. They're behind the white lock cages. And I know the picture's small, but on those white locked doors, there are these little red tags. And those red tags indicate that these servers contain customer data. And that's one of the reasons why they're in locked cages. And you can see some of the cameras that are viewing these servers in the picture, but there are a whole bunch of cameras that you can't see that are monitoring server access from every single angle. And of course, even a smaller number of the subset of the people who have access have the ability to unlock a cage or do something with one of these servers. Now, you'll also see some world-class redundant high availability infrastructure. Our data centers are built using multiple electricity supplies, constant voltage, constant frequency power supplies, backup power generators, arrays of batteries, redundant air conditioning, backup water supply and cooling systems, and as I mentioned earlier, the appropriate controls for fire suppression and fire alarms. And we use gas-based fire suppression systems as well. Now, our existing power and surge protection mitigation includes measures that clamp down voltage fluctuations, including robust grounding schemes for lightning protection. And they also serve as indirect controls to protect against things like solar storms and electromagnetic pulses. So in the event that there is a power or utilities failure, the proactive controls such as the redundant electrical supplies and the backup power generators, and so forth, they're going to ensure continuous data operations, data center operations, uninterrupted for at least 48 hours. And all of our data centers have priority contracts with for refueling and water supply to ensure that the data centers keep running. And then, of course, in the event of any kind of catastrophic failure, all our data centers have load shedding capabilities. And by that meaning, we can simply fail over the load to another data center. In fact, we recently did this with Hurricane Harvey because we knew that our San Antonio data center was at risk. And so once we knew that it was coming, we started failing over databases all across North America, and we were able to fail over tens of thousands of databases in a very, very short amount of time. And basically that meant even though San Antonio got hit pretty hard, there was zero impact to our operations whatsoever. Now, all of our environmental conditions are also monitored for anything that could adversely affect performance of either the information processing equipment or any of the supporting equipment. We've got HVAC systems that are kept fully operational, and they help prevent technical equipment from overheating and failing. We also have lightning protection. That's installed in all buildings, and we do that as required by code or deemed necessary for other reasons. And we've got lightning projection filters that get installed on incoming power and communications lines using that same logic. And of course, all of this is monitored in real time, 24/7 by 365 by humans, and not just the humans who are in the data center, humans around the world who are responsible for not just data center operations, but also the individual services and workloads like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and so forth that run inside these data centers. It's also interesting to know that we have three themes that define our environmental sustainability strategy. One is reducing the impact of our operations, and that's necessary when you think about it, given the size of our hyperscale cloud. We also want to enable resource efficiency through and with IT, and we want to accelerate research breakthroughs that really benefit society at large. Our global data center infrastructure is 100% carbon neutral. Our overriding goal is to minimize our impact on the environment by becoming carbon neutral in our own operations, utilizing an internal carbon fee that charges internal groups for each metric ton of carbon that's associated with the operations of our data centers, or software development labs, or our office buildings, or even employee travel for all of us to come here. And by assessing this internal carbon fee on all of our business groups based on current market pricing for renewable energy and carbon offsets, we're driving company-wide consciousness and increasing behaviors that allow us to reduce our overall environmental impact. And what's interesting is there's a common question that we get from businesses and other thought leaders where, is the cloud more efficient and sustainable than on-premises IT operations? To find out, we actually engaged a couple partners, Accenture and WSP, and they did a study assessing the impact of moving Microsoft Exchange, SharePoint, and Dynamics 365 workloads from on-premises to a hosted cloud. And they found that when organizations move these services to a Microsoft-hosted cloud, they're able to reduce their per-user carbon footprint by at least 30%. And in the case of small businesses, the result was even more dramatic, potential savings of up to 90%. You can see 92% for a small organization running Exchange, 98% for SharePoint, 96% for Dynamics 365. So significant savings in terms of environmental impact moving from on-premises to the cloud. Some other interesting facts, you may have noticed that none of the slides that you saw, or none of the servers that you saw rather in the previous slides had any kind of branding on them. Well, that's because none is needed. When we started our cloud services decades ago, we did purchase servers and we began modifying them and basically having them modified to include anything that was not necessary, so things like bezels and branding and so forth. Now, we've actually grown so large at this point, and we are using so many servers that it's now actually more cost-effective for us to build our own. And in fact, that is what we do. We now design and build our own servers. And as you might imagine, because of our sheer size, we also have an incredibly large number of hard drives in our data centers. And because of our hyperscale, even with a very low annual failure rate for our hard drives, we still, of course, have hard drives that fail every way. And when a hard drive does fail, we follow a standard operating procedure for decommissioning it that's based on NIST 888. And the NIST guidelines also encompass both physical sanitization and actual destruction as well. And all of our drives are actually encrypted using BitLocker already, so that sanitization process isn't really needed, but we do it anyway because it's part of the standard procedure. Now, the other thing is, sometimes when a disk fails, it's really dead. It cannot be used at all. And so what we do is we have a physical destruction process that occurs on site, and all of that is, all those disks are destroyed, and the destruction is audited using an ISO process. So for hard drives that can't be wiped, we destroy the media on site, which renders the recovery of information impossible. So you saw in the previous one, we scan the drive. Now the drive is going into a machine, and that machine is going to chop it up into tiny bits, making recovery not just impossible, but really very impossible. Extra impossible, if you will. And it gets to a point where we basically have just a bucket of shards in this container here. And at this point, the data is what we would term commercially unrecoverable. Now, I mentioned that to somebody yesterday, and they were like, why do you add commercially on there? And that's because that's the language in the contract that we have with you when you buy our services. So if you want to know that your data has been destroyed and there's no way it can ever be recovered, the legal term for that is commercially unrecoverable, and that's how we render your data, that's how we render dead hard drives. We don't render your data commercially unrecoverable, just the dead hard drives, Okay, so let's talk about personnel screening too. We perform extensive background checks on all employees with any access to our data centers or our production environments. And access could mean physical access, logical access, or even network management access. And of course, we can only perform these background checks where local laws allow us to do so. And when we can perform them, the processes include things like verification of their resume, confirmation of any academic or professional credentials, past employment, criminal background checks, identity verification, and even for some positions, we may even do a credit check as well. Now, again, we can only do these checks where local laws allow it. So if we have employees who are in a location where we cannot do these checks, those employees do not get and will never get, until they can be checked, any access to our data centers or to the production systems. So that could be, again, physical, logical, or network management access. There are also cases where we might perform even more screening, though, such as checking government-managed lists like the Office of Foreign Assets Control, the Bureau of Industry and Security, and the Office of Defense Trade Control's debarred persons. If you're on one of these lists, yeah, you're not gonna get through any kind of background check at Microsoft, and you may have trouble generally finding employment within the United States as well. Now, it's also important to note that we have what we like to think of as very extreme operational efficiency, with more than 100 data centers spread out to more than 140 countries and millions of servers and all the activity and all the hard drives we get in. How can we possibly achieve this level of uptime at this scale? Well, we automate everything, everything. The way we usually describe it is that code runs the service. Humans govern the service, but code runs the service. So if you think about this red circle as being the total sum of operations that we have to do to manage our data centers, that's all that circle is. It's everything that it takes to run our cloud. It is really that little white dot there. That's the number of operations that would require a human to be intervened. So out of that whole giant red circle, that little white dot there is how many times a human needs to get involved. And then, I know it's super tiny, but I have to prove a point. That little tiny black dot that's in there, those are the number of operations that would require us to need access to your data. So there's a very, very small number. It's something like 0.016% of all operations that we do might require us to have access to your data. And of course, with features like Customer Lockbox for Exchange and SharePoint, that's something where even in those cases, we would not have access to your data unless and until you approved our request for that access. So speaking of access to customer data, all Microsoft engineers have what we call zero standing access to your data. None of us have any capability to get to your data. We have a just-in-time authorization and access model that requires engineers to request elevated privileges for a limited period to perform administrative duties. And so engineers submit requests through various tools. So for instance, for Exchange and SharePoint, we might go through something called Taurus, or what we call externally Lockbox. And then Customer Lockbox goes on top of that, where the customer can be included in the approval chain. And then other workloads use other ones. For instance, Homey is used by the Yammer team, and Azure JIT is used by the Azure team. So engineers have to submit these requests, and they have to be approved by a separate manager outside of their management chain prior to that engineer gaining the ability to access customer data. And then if they do get manager approval, then they'll have time-limited and scope-limited access to customer data to work on the customer's issue. Now, we do have some additional controls in there. For example, we use logical isolation for each tenant. That's based on Azure Active Directory and role-based access control. And we also make extensive use of encryption such that, irrespective of customer configuration, all data within our enterprise cloud services is encrypted both at rest and in motion. And there's also some additional forms of isolation that some of the workloads will also do. For example, SharePoint Online uses service encryption to provide additional protection for data at rest above and beyond the BitLocker encryption that we already have on the disks. And hopefully you heard this week that we also announced that service encryption, including service encryption with a customer managed key option, is now generally available for Exchange Online as well. So that's an additional level of encryption that you can have. Now, if you don't want the customer key aspect, you don't have to use it, but you should know we are also going to encrypt all mailbox data at the mailbox level as well, whether you manage that key or not. Now, of course, we continuously monitor all aspects of our environment, including the use of any delegation, privilege elevation, or any other operations that occur within our service. And because we must undergo regular third-party audits for standards like ISO, SOC, and FedRAMP, just about any given time, there's some form of external audit going on against one or more of our cloud services. All right, let's talk a little bit about privacy and control. So for privacy and control, we really boil this down to us trying to build your trust based on 6 key privacy principles: control, transparency, security, strong legal protections, no content-based targeting, and benefits to you. The last 2 sort of go hand in hand. What we're basically saying there is we do not mine your mailboxes or your SharePoint sites or any of your other data so that we can provide any advertising services to you. We don't do that at all. We do a lot of powerful reasoning over your data, but we only do that so that we can provide you the services for which you've paid and work to improve those services based on the telemetry and signals that you send us as a result of your usage of those services. But you're never going to see any advertisements from us, popping up on your SharePoint site or in your mailboxes based on what you're doing. The only things that you're going to see light up in the service are things that we're giving you to increase productivity, to increase security, or just to give you a better experience with our cloud. And your privacy is important to us, and that's why we provide you with a very rich privacy management experience that enables you to make both informed choices and to manage privacy settings for all of our cloud services. So not just enterprise, but consumer services as well. We know you use Bing and Cortana and maybe one of our web browsers. And so you can actually visit your own account page, account.microsoft.com/privacy, and that's where you can see all the privacy settings, see what data is being collected on your behalf, and actually go in and clear out some of this data if you don't want it to be collected as well. Change the settings if you want to change the behavior as well. Now, when it comes to compliance, we are committed to the highest levels of trust, transparency, standards conformance, and regulatory compliance. Now, the majority of our trust-related content can be found at the Microsoft Trust Center. We've organized the content by role, so if you're a risk and compliance officer, or a security officer, or a governance and privacy officer, or maybe you're just a business decision maker, you can find and download targeted content that is designed just for your specific role in your organization. And this includes things like attestations, certificates of compliance, and other certification and audit materials as well. And as you'll see, this is quite an extensive list of just the audit materials we have available. We also have what we call the Service Trust Preview, and here's where you can find both those same audit reports, but you can also find what we call trust documents. And these are deep dive, transparency-based white papers that provide as much details as we're able to share about how we isolate tenants from one another within Office 365. How exactly do we do encryption down to key strength, algorithms, cipher suites, key management, and so forth. How we do admin access controls like lockbox, customer lockbox, personnel screening. How we prevent your data from becoming corrupt. How we protect you from malware and ransomware, and so forth. Now, Service Trust Preview is accessible by anyone that has any Azure AD account. That can be from a paid subscription of any of the cloud services, or it can be a trial subscription as well. And that's one of the reasons we have the ability for you to sign up for a free trial, so that if you don't have an account, you can sign up, get a free trial, and then get access to all this information. If you do have an account, and in particular an Office 365 tenant, then you can go into the Security and Compliance Center, and you can view an area we call Service Assurance. And the Service Assurance area also includes all the same compliance reports and trust documents you'll find on the STP, but it also includes this feature called Audited Controls. And Audited Controls is where we literally take one of the audits that was done against our cloud services by an independent third-party auditor, and we publish the entire results of that audit. So in this case, the NIST 853 set of controls is based on the FedRAMP audit. FedRAMP maps to NIST very well, and so we've exposed our FedRAMP audit as a set of mapped NIST controls. And you can go in, you could look through various control names, you could do keyword searches, filter on just those controls with findings and so forth. And when you look at the control details, you're going to see everything that the auditor saw. You're going to see all the implementation details that we have. You're also going to see things like what the auditor did to verify that, who he interviewed, what evidence they saw, when did they see it, and so forth. And then there may be controls, like I said, that have findings. And if there are any findings with any controls, we'll also include the Microsoft management response to those findings, so you can make an informed decision as to whether or not you feel our response, which might be based on maybe other mitigating controls or other reasons, is an acceptable response to you. And when you think about our compliance platform, we really do have the largest portfolio in the industry. Everywhere in which we operate, we look very closely at the laws, standards, and regulations that we need to adhere to, and we work very hard to meet those or exceed them. Now, we also provide a number of disclosures to help you and other stakeholders evaluate how we are meeting our commitments to what we call corporate social responsibility. So in early 2014, we received permission to publish data about the legal demands that we received from the US government pursuant to national security laws. And we update this information every 6 months. So it's not super frequent, but you can go in twice a year and get the updated reports. So you can visit this corporate social responsibility hub. We used to call it the Microsoft Transparency Hub. So if you're using that URL, you can still go to that URL to get here. And you can do things like download reports regarding law enforcement requests and national security orders for user data. We report on the number of orders we receive. However, receipt of an order does not necessarily mean that Microsoft ultimately disclosed any information. In fact, we've successfully challenged these requests in court and will continue to do so when we believe that there is grounds for such a challenge. Now, we have a content removal process report, and that covers requests from governments. such as claims of violations of local laws or our terms of use, or it could include requests from European and Russian residents to filter search results about them on Bing, or queries that include their names. It could also be requests from copyright owners to Bing claiming copyright infringement, and it could also be things like requests to move non-consensual pornography, or what's called revenge porn. And the site also includes additional information on how Microsoft works to protect human rights, on workforce diversity and inclusion, on environmental sustainability, responsible sourcing, and investor relation reports as well. Not all of these reports are updated every 6 months. Some are done more regularly than that, but the law enforcement and national security order for user data, those are every 6 months. Finally, there's reliability, which to us means much more than just making dependable software and services. It also means investing in processes and technology to improve reliability, focusing on every customer's experience, and maintaining active partnerships with a wide variety of software and hardware companies. Our data centers and services are resilient by design. They are designed to run 24/7 by 365, and they're architected for for fast identification and testing of any probable failures. And they also all are built with mechanisms that allow rapid recovery from any failures that are based on industry standards and best practices. We also provide you with service health information about our services, including when we're going to be conducting planned maintenance. And we have a range of dashboards that are available to you that provide feeds and other notification mechanisms to help you get access to the information in both planned and unplanned event scenarios. I mentioned several times that we adhere to the industry standard best practices and certifications to ensure reliability. And in most cases, we are thought leaders in developing those best practices and certifications. And we include them as part of our compliance requirements, and that includes things like service level agreements that are financially backed and built right into the contracts that you sign. And then finally, we offer our customers many tools to help resiliency built into any applications they may be running in our cloud services like Azure and so forth. All right, so with that, that's all the content I have. I would love to hear any questions that you might have. If you do have a question, please do come up to one of the microphones so that it can be captured on the recording. All right, brave soul. Yes, sir.
How you doing? Got a question. So I'm an infrastructure manager, and so I visit a lot of data centers like you showed here. But I was wondering, what is the policy for Microsoft? Like, our company requires like every 2 years. It's great to have all the reports you can pull down, but we physically have to set eyes on the facility. What is the process?
Sure, great question. So if you couldn't hear it, the question was, what is the process for someone to be able to come in and do a physical audit of one of our data centers? The set of customers that we have granted that right to audit to are the members of our cloud compliance programs, either our regulatory compliance program or our financial services compliance program. The FinServ would be, any FinServ, GSIFI, Insure, et cetera. Anybody else, healthcare, et cetera, would fall into the regulatory program. And while those programs are separate paperwork, we manage them centrally. We have the same PM for both programs. Centralization is that. So if you join that program, that is how you get that right to audit. And you could actually exercise that right more frequently than 2 years. You could do that every year if you wanted to. And included with that is your right at any time to ask us any questions, and we will be bound by our contract to get you all the information that we can. Now, some of the information that we may provide to you, much of it is under NDA, but there also may be a separate set of information that we provide to you that's what we call clean room content. And so that would mean you'd have to come in, or we'd have to set up a monitored situation where you would be able to maybe read a document or see some evidence, but you wouldn't be able to take any pictures or notes or anything. You just have to see it in your head and then take that away with you and hope you can remember it all. But that's basically the levels and the processes that we do to facilitate that. Great question, thank you. We still have 4 minutes left. And in fact, you're not allowed to leave until it's over anyway, so. Hey, I said you're not allowed to leave. Security. All right, well, if that's it, then I will give you 3.5 minutes of your life back. Thank you very much for coming. Hope you enjoyed Ignite. And we'll see you next year.